everyone, today I'm going to show you how to turn this little guy into this. If you're a school teacher teaching K-12, that is primary and secondary level students, and would like free licenses of Ableton for your school, please see the contact information below for Simon Lyon, an Ableton representative. Simon is also able to facilitate training for teachers who would like to learn Ableton more fully. Having collected all our sounds from the ukulele, I'm now going to show you the project layout and what I did with each sample. The original sounds like this. If you press Shift and Tab at the same time, you bring up the clip view. I first transposed it down 2 octaves, which is 24 semitones. And it sounds like this. And then I put effects on it, and here's the final product. So what's going on here is if I press Shift and Tab again, I can see the effects that are on this. And without the effect track, you can barely hear it. And with. So what I'm doing is accentuating the bass frequencies and putting saturator with drive, overdrive, and then the drum bus with more drive and crunch on it. And essentially what the overdrive is doing is just giving it harmonic substance, so you get that growl bass sound. In the clip view, you can also automate parameters on the envelope. So if I come into my envelope here, I'm going to clip, I'm going to transposition, the blue dot shows you what's automated. You'll see that the initial attack of the note comes from 25 semitones higher, and then at the end of it there's a roll off of a 35 or 30 semitones. So it gives this effect that it's somebody sliding off off a bass guitar. Let you hear that once more. And in context. To get the bass line to go on notes, I've just copied and pasted this over and then transposed it to the pitch that I need. The second sound I took was this Plucky harp. Here's what it sounds like originally. And here's what the final product sounds like. So I took the sound and put it into a sampler. You get a sampler by going into Instruments and dragging a sampler onto an empty MIDI track. And then you can drag a sound. So if I go back to my original sound, you can drag the audio clip directly into drop sample here. And then if your keyboard is hooked up, that's me playing the keyboard, the MIDI keyboard, it's here. And it pitches it automatically across the keyboard. So in the sampler that I have here, the original sample is there, you can see it. It's highlighted in yellow. And I've messed with some of the filter envelope settings. The pro tip here is I've set up a return channel. If you right click a track and you put in an insert return track, you can send the signal, the dry signal, through an effects chain. And what I did was I added delay so that when I play it, it sounds like this. And I'll go through the effects now. When I play it, it sounds like this. So that's with delay only. The beauty about sending it to a return track is I can affect the sound of the delay only. So the dry signal stays intact, and then I can blend using the return signal here. I can blend how much of it gets onto the track. So it's a very, very useful way of manipulating sound. So the delay, I put a vocoder on the delay in the modulator setting and with the enhance buttons on, and then I left pretty much everything as the same. The formant is up a tiny bit, so that gives it a higher pitch sound. I then put a bit of reverb on that sound. I then gave it a bit of space with chorus. And then I EQ'd it a bit. The EQ is just so it didn't cloud up the mix. So the third sound I collected was to create a pad. This is what it sounds like. So you might think that sounds a bit strange. What I did was, in the clip view again, and if it's not showing for you, remember to hit Shift and Tab. One of the parameters you can play with is this lengthening by 2 or shortening by 2. So if I have the clip selected again and I play with these, you'll see the waveform gets either shorter or longer. Why it's useful to elongate when making a pad sound is because a pad usually has long notes and it wants to sustain the sound. So in contrast to the Plucky harp sound, when we pull this into our sampler, which I'm about to do now, you want the sound to sustain, that when you hold down a note that it sustains. So this is what I ended up with. I have taken that warbly sound and taken a section of it just from here to here, so that when I play on my keyboard, it sustains. And obviously higher the notes, you can see it repeating. I also have the repeat mode or sustain mode selected, that this loops. So between the parts where it is bluey green, that's where it's looping. I've also put the crossfades up so that there's no snap or click when it gets to the end of the loop. I've also added a bit of space with this frequency shifter. Lastly, I just want to show you something cool you can do with the MIDI control. Go into your envelope section again in this clip view, Shift Tab. You can bring up the pitch bend at particular points. So you'll see here I have, when it plays, you will be able to hear it goes up and down really rapidly, and then up and down here really rapidly. It just gives us something else, and then at the very end there's a little scoop up high. So I'll let you hear that now. And that's the pad. This next sound is the one I used to create the kick. Here's the original sound and the final product. So I took the original sound, I duplicated it on its own on a second track, and then I layered them together, and I EQ'd and put different effects on both so that they sounded well together. To make this kick sound, I wanted a hard-hitting, low thud sound. So I used auto filter to get the right resonance I wanted. I put a saturator on and I EQ to accentuate the lows. In context. The next sound I collected was to create the shaker sound. Here's the original. So to make this sound, I just scratched the top of the ukulele. I again took this sound and put it into a sampler. So here's the final product. A sampler is a MIDI instrument, and therefore you can put MIDI effects onto the sampler before the sound itself. So I took an arpeggiator to make the rhythm that you hear. I set it to 16 notes, which is semiquavers, and I brush pressed kind of random buttons on my MIDI keyboard, like I'm doing now, and the combination of those create different pitches and different sounds and different velocities. Again, I manipulated some of the filtering options within the sampler, changed the circuit from clean to OSR, and just up the drive, which basically gave me more volume. And then to give it a bit more movement and a bit more life, like you would experience a drummer playing hats, I put a bit of auto pan on it, so it doesn't stay in the one spot in your left to right ear range, and I've automated that. So it dances around your ears a little bit. And then I just compress the sound to make it stand out a bit more. The next sound that I took was to create the snare. Here's the original, and here's the final product. So in this beat, the snare happens on 3, and in a lot of halftime feel beats, that's where the snare is put, as opposed to your 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3. The effects that are making this snare sound like it does: compression, EQ, like normal, and then I have a saturator to put a bit of drive on it. I've put a reverb on it to accentuate the high frequencies of the snare sound, and it adds to the raspiness of the snare. The most important thing in creating the snare sound is putting OTT on it. OTT is found in the audio effects under Multiband dynamics, and it's one of the presets under here, and I've used it a lot on snare sounds in particular. Without the OTT, and with the OTT, I think it takes out some of the woodiness of the snare sound originally. The next thing I want to talk about is I took that same snare sound, I made a snare fill out of it. So again, with the metronome on, I'll leave the 2 of these on and you'll hear it. So what's happening here is I've got some of the same effects on as I just duplicated that same sound, and then I put Little Alter Boy by Soundtoys. With the Alter Boy on it, I automated the pitch and formant. So if I select A on my keyboard, it'll bring up the automation, and you can see the line that I drew in, so that the pitch would go downwards along with the formant sound. Another thing to note is there was a happy accident. I let this just whip back to where its original setting was, and the reverb tail gets a kind of swooping sound towards the end, and I decided to leave that in because I kind of liked it in the mix. So you'll hear as these reset to 3.5, it actually throws the pitch of the reverb tail up. And that's pretty much it for the snares. The next sound I'm going to talk about is this impact sound. here's what it sounds like initially. And then to create what is commonly referred to as an impact sound, I just put a heap load of reverb on it, and it sounds something like this. So what you'll also notice is what sounds like a sharp inhale of breath, almost. So if I just play that again. And what I want to show you is how I create that sound. So if I make a new track here, Command and T, sets up a new audio track. And what I'm going to do is show you from scratch how I made this. So if I take this audio file and I drag it down here, in order for it to duplicate and not just move it, I press down Option on a Mac as I dragged it. So this now, solo it, and it sounds like this. So what I would have done was go into the clip view with Shift and Tab, it brings up the clip view, and hit this button here called, it says REV, short for reverse. And when you click that button, it turns the track around. So you get something like this. And then in order to get the sound that I wanted to get, I would have trimmed it down a little bit, put it right up towards the end, would have turned it up a tiny bit, and then finesse it by just putting in the fade. You get that idea. So here's the impact sound in context. So you get the idea. My computer's at 50%, so it's having a bit of a freak out, but you get the idea. Moving on to the next sound. The last sound I'm going to talk about is the sound I used to create the lead melody. I took this sample of me playing harmonics on the ukulele. I then put that sound into a sampler, and this is the final product. So what makes it sound like a whistle is this section here in the filter global tab. I've taken off the initial attack of the pluck of the harmonic, and by doing so there's a much softer attack which adds to the whistle effect. If I turn that back on, it's a lot more percussive. The other audio effect that's adding to the whistle sound is a frequency shifter. The LFO is what helps the vibrato sound, and putting up the spread gives it a nice space in the stereo field. And now in context.